administrator and our planner, but there are things that we can control, and we'll tell you about those. We'll tell you dimensions and about trees and about the clear cutting that has happened before development begins. We don't like it either. It doesn't happen in the city. They like to do it before they come into the city, but at any rate.
Actually, the main concern is
highways. Yes, sir.
And now with organic development, Culver was our escape.
Yes.
Easy way to get into town. But with the development there on Culver, and just on the other side of 501 on El Bethel, Culver is going to be a main drag.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, seriously, before you approve infrastructure, how many developments are you going to allow in the city of Conway?
She'll have the answers for you, sir. All right, thank you so much. Is there anyone else here that would like to approach the council at this time? Mr. Goldfinch.
Mayor, I move that we close public input at this time, please.
He's our second. Mr. Hyman.
Mayor, I would second Mr. Goldfinch's motion.
Properly seconded motion to close public input at this time. All in favor with a show of hands. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. Item 6 is our special presentations. One is a discussion of tree ordinance, Ms. Hyman, and B is a discussion of amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance. Article 5, specific use regulations regarding requirements for fences and walls. Ms. Hux will pick that up. Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council. I know this has been discussed in previous meetings. The current tree preservation ordinance that the city has. It was discussed at the budget retreat and in a previous meeting. And the main concern that we heard from council was the fees that can rack up when you have a lot of trees that you're dealing with. I don't believe it was an issue with the ordinance itself, but with just when it becomes such a burden when it's such a large number. So to continue the conversation, staff has put a recommendation in the current ordinance that puts a cap per acre on the fees. And this starting number for discussion is a cap of $15,000 per acre. And I'm happy to answer any questions or help with any discussion items.
Are you saying 15 or 50?
15,000. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Goldfinch.
Thank you, Mayor. Mary Catherine, how did staff come up with this 15?
And I'll be honest with you, Councilman Goldfinch, we did a lot of research prior to the budget retreat for different cities around the state to see what kind of information we could find, to see how the city stacked up to other places. And the only other place we found within the cities that we researched was a cap for Greenville for $25,000. And that seemed a little steep for the city. So we chose $15,000 as the starting point in discussion. But like I said, most of the other places don't have a cap. So this was something that we thought would be more appropriate for our city.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Hyman?
Well, and the gentleman speaking over there brought it up about clear cutting.
Yeah.
And we see a pattern with that, with people clear cutting county properties and wanting to come into the city. And then one of the things that we had talked about was ways that we can work our tree ordinance so it does what it's supposed to do and prevents that from happening.
Right.
The issue, I think, with the 15,000 is that's still such a steep number when you add stumping and that thing. I mean, you could easily be looking at $25,000 an acre. And I just foresee what's going to happen is people are just going to keep clear cutting and doing that. I think if it was more of something like a $5,000 one, and then maybe we do something where we say, if you clear cut it and you want to come to the city, we're not going to give you a building license until this period.
So much time. Right.
Yeah, I mean, 15,000 on a 6-7 acre property, you could easily be looking at $100,000. And with property prices around here, yes, they're valuable, but that's a $15,000 on top of your cost of properties. That's pretty steep.
And that is another concern I know that council had raised was when folks clear cut in the county and then come into the city. And that's not something that we have included, but that is something that if council is interested, we could come up with some language for that also.
And the concern that I have more Then the developer stuff is more of the, and we've talked about this, but the person who inherited a lot from their granddad.
Yeah.
And they want to go build on that lot when they move back to Conway. And then they're hit with what could potentially be $15,000 before they've ever done anything. And that's for a new couple moving here, that's a lot. But it's just my take on it.
Mr. Goldfinch.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Catherine, in the tree ordinance, I printed it off.
Yeah.
And at the end of the last page, it speaks about violations, and it speaks to the fact that in the event that the city arborist cannot determine the DBH, and can you refresh my memory? DBH stands for?
It's diameter breast height, and it's
Okay.
measured at 4.5 feet. So that's where you get the measurement, not at the base of the tree, but at that height.
Okay. And it goes on to say that, if that can't be determined, in other words, if the developer or whomever goes out there and clears the lot, that they're subject to a fine equal to 10 cents per square foot of cleared property. And so if you figure there's, 43,560 feet in an acre at 10 cents a foot, that's a $4,350 fine. So why not?
Go with that.
I'm just throwing that out. It's already in the ordinance. But
Yeah, no, I think that could absolutely be. So you're saying go by that number?
I mean,
rather than the
I'm just
15,000
pointing out
count.
it's already there. We're not reinventing the wheel.
Sure.
So whether it's 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, I think you're already taking what's in the ordinance and saying,
No.
we're not being unreasonable by this, because you've got to strike some balance in holding developers' feet to the fire to make sure that they do the right thing.
Right.
But then at the same point, you don't want to prevent a responsible development from coming to town that's going to generate jobs, particularly commercial projects, right? Maybe not so much residential projects, but commercial projects that are going to, produce jobs, that are going to produce tax revenue. You want to strike that balance. And I just think that, something in that range would go a long way.
Anyone else? I was going to wait until the end to speak. I spent some time with that same tree ordinance over the last week or so, and there's just a couple of points that I think that are so important as we talk about our tree ordinances. I believe that if acreage is being purchased by a would-be developer, that they are not doing due diligence until they first look at uses that are approved for that area and what they need to do about the topography. I just believe that that's what they do before they buy the land, and they decide whether or not they can follow our rules and still make profit. And if they can't, so this tree ordinance addresses critical public concerns for our trees. They're a valuable resource, and this is all in the interest of health, safety, and beautification. The ambiance of mature trees, nothing touches it. Noise abatement, air cooling and purification, controls flooding and erosion, reduces dust and airborne pollutants, property value enhancement, habitat and shelter for wildlife. To preserve trees in the path of development is a particular reason for this ordinance being in place. When most of this was written in 2007.
That's
It's
correct.
not an old ordinance, not for somebody my age anyway. That's relatively new. And we made a decision that our trees are important, that they need to be set apart, that we want them to be different from other communities that are allowing things to happen that we don't think is good for Conway. The process that are in place is to further discourage somebody from deciding, well, there's a way out of this. I'll just pay X number of dollars for a tree. If we had charged $25 for a tree, we wouldn't have one left today. But we made it difficult for people to come in and take away our trees. We've been a tree city for 35 years. We don't take this lightly. If we're going to honor Ms. Beatty for standing out with that shotgun and not allowing people to take down live oak trees, then the only way to do that is for us to continue to protect them. And I just don't understand. the person who's gifted with a lot that wants to build there, if they can't build there, you know, life is tough. There are a lot of things that we have to consider as we make decisions. I believe that it would be wrong for us to take our own ordinance and water it down, weaken it such that development continues to do what it has done and deplete our trees. I don't think we should change it because one developer's having a problem. I think he should have figured that out before he bought the property. I have to do that. At the risk of repeating myself, that's all I need to say for now. Anybody else?
Can I just,
Sure, of course.
Mayor, I mean, it's, in principle, I can't totally disagree. In your point about a developer doing their due diligence, you're 100% correct. I just don't want, and this isn't specific to one developer, this is specific to anyone who is doing their due diligence currently, right now as we speak, and saying, you know what, I'm not going to move my company here. I'm not going to move my, long-term care facility here because it's cost prohibitive. These are potentially incredible services and/or companies that can provide legitimate opportunities for our community. And so I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree at all. It's just that I think in some regard, we have to do a cost benefit analysis and realize that it can be cost prohibitive. In the case of the, inheriting the lot, y'all have heard me talk about it several times. And so if I may, I'm just going to present Exhibit 1A. 3 numbers. Top one is $60,070. Okay, in the year 2000, my grandmother died, and I inherited an acre lot from her, and it's wooded. It's still wooded. It's never been developed. It's never used a dime of public service or money. It's just a wooded lot sitting there. Okay, since 2000, the second number is $19,737. That's the property taxes I've paid on this lot in 20 years, okay? Because it's a 6% property. Number 3, $15,400. That's the dollar amount that it would cost me to go build a house on that lot right now, okay? Because, when you count up the water oaks, a couple of magnolias, and I'm not talking about live oaks. I would never cut down a live oak tree. I love live oaks. So when you add all of this up, when you add the taxes and the tree fine, you get that number less the property value is less than half than what it's worth. And so I want to compromise here. I just think we need to find some balance. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Anyone else? I think the discussion is done. Thank you so much.
Is there guidance from staff on where to go from here?
I don't know who you'd listen to.
Should we bring back an ordinance putting a cap at 15,000 and allow council to either accept it or amend it from here? We've been told to bring it to you for workshop. That's what this is. So absent guidance, we don't know where to go with it from here.
Well, I think we need to get closer to some kind of consensus before we start looking at a new ordinance, or especially one that makes it easier for trees to be taken down.
So how do we get closer to consensus if there's not more discussion?
I don't know. I don't think we're gonna get there tonight.
I mean, I don't look at it as making it easier for trees to come down. Part of what I said was putting something in place where developers literally cannot get a building permit if they clear cut. That makes it a little harder for them to take the trees down.
That's for clear cutting though, but we're talking about something quite different.
No, we're not. I mean, we're talking about still them bringing them in. We can put that in our ordinance.
So you're talking about if they do it at the county and then come in,
Right.
that's what you're talking about, okay. Which they are two different, I see what you're saying, it is two
Right, those
different
are two-
issues.
right,
Yeah,
exactly,
but those are
exactly.
the two main concerns.
And I've
that
mentioned a
have
few
been
times that we
Yeah.
could put safeguards in place that if we can't prevent somebody who is just outside the city limit, who takes down their trees because they get to do it in the county and because we disallow it, that before they come in, that there be some provisions. I don't know whether that's cash. I don't know whether that's planting trees. I mean, there are all kinds of things, but it has come up before.
Right, it has. And it would have to be some sort of blanket fee or the 10 cent that you brought up, because it'd be impossible for the arborist to know if they did it in the county. You know, if she hadn't got on there and measured to know exactly what had been taken down. So we'd have to put some sort of dollar figure, I think, on that also.
Well, I mean, we've got a full council. I suppose we bring something before us, but I don't want just that. I want us to be able to compare
Okay.
something. What if we didn't do that? What kind of other options are there? Let's go finish.
What about, and the ordinance gives us the discretion to do this already, but what if we looked at the type of tree? What if we, because I want to be very clear.
Yeah, because I'm talking about hardwoods.
Yeah,
for the most part.
The arborists talked a lot about how trees soak up water. They do. They soak up water. We have a flooding issue. Everybody knows that. But you can go down and cut as many pine trees that soak up a ton of water as you want to.
Yeah.
And so that argument's sort of off center for me. What if we talked about the types of trees that you can cut? I don't think anybody on this council, and I'll speak for Gene Timms, because we've discussed it, would ever want a live oak tree cut down. I mean, that is our mascot, right? I mean, that is essentially our city mascot. So for me, I'm not talking about oak trees, live oak trees. I'm talking about, water oaks and other types of varieties that are harvested all the time. Maybe, that could be a factor.
Sure, that could be a factor.
Okay.
Now, I don't pretend to be in a position that I could just say yes to one tree and no to another. I mean, even that would take a little education on my part. But I'm thinking about hardwoods. I'm thinking about the larger growing trees that just preserve a property, that just bring it all those things I read on that list. Every one of them. Mr. White?
And is the arborist here? I don't see it.
She is not, she's out of town this
Okay.
week.
And has she been privy to this discussion as well?
She has.
I think we need to leave her into this discussion as well, so that she can bring her 2 cents, $1, whatever it might be, to the table.
And since
because
there's
she
several
knows
things,
things.
I'm so sorry. I thought you were done. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What I was going to recommend, though, is that maybe we have a little bit more relaxed workshop with Wanda there. Let's look at all the things that might make a difference. I'm certainly open to looking at it, but I don't want us to just lower the figure just to make somebody able to do something that maybe just shouldn't be in a place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Item D is a discussion of the amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance. Ms. Hooks. We're going to talk about specific use regulations regarding requirements for fences and walls.
So we've had a few issues that have come up over the past several months with regard to fences and walls. First, this proposed amendment would address chain link fencing in the central business district, which would include a majority of parcels that are located within the commercial historic design review district. The issue was raised at a recent community appearance board meeting when an application was reviewed to replace chain link fencing in the rear of a property. Currently, the community appearance guidelines do not address chain link except in the Main Street Historic Design Review District, which allows chain link to be in the rear yard in dark green or black to blend in with the landscape. This amendment would not affect properties in the Main Street Historic Design Review District, however. The downtown district or properties in a historic design review district are not located in the Gateway Corridor overlay, which prohibits chain link fencing. It specifically omits properties zoned central business district and core commercial from the Gateway Corridor overlay requirements. Secondly, this amendment would amend language with regard to fences and walls on corner lots to clarify that the 10-foot setback for fences over 4 feet in height is 10 feet. And currently, the ordinance states the fence or wall must be 10 feet from the road, right-of-way, or lot line, which has caused confusion amongst staff and the public when reviewing permit applications for proposed fences. So this is more of a housekeeping issue. And here on the screen is just some examples of chain link fencing that have existed downtown. And finally, the amendment would prohibit fences and walls from being located or constructed within public drainage easement. So currently, there's no language in our ordinance that prohibits fences or walls within public drainage easements. They've always been permitted within easements. However, it's caused issues for city staff when maintenance is required, and staff must notify the property owner in advance. And many times, staff has to remove the fencing before the maintenance can occur and then reinstall it. So Public Works is in the process of updating their stormwater ordinance, which will address this issue as well. So to be consistent, staff would like to update the ordinance as well, the Unified Development Ordinance. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hutz. So is this an example of our staff having to move away fencing in
Yes,
order
ma'am.
to work on the drainage system? Any comments from the council? Any questions?
And just, I'm sorry.
Sure, go right ahead. Mr.
If there is someone that did this, would the city be responsible for moving and replacing? And if they are not in line with where they're supposed to be, like say, they're right at the corner, a corner lot, and they're right at the sidewalk, would we be responsible for making them move that fence back?
So if the amendment were to pass and there are existing fences that are in place now that don't meet that 10-foot setback, it wouldn't be retroactive. So we wouldn't go back and make people move them if they already have them. So this would just be moving forward. And it'd be the same for locating them within drainage easements. And yes, city staff does, and I believe, and Brandon could probably speak to this better, but they do remove them and reinstall them. And I don't believe that the homeowners are charged for that replacement.
Sounds like that expense could add up.
Mm-hmm. And
Well,
so,
go ahead.
suppose the landowner, a property owner, does not want you on his or her property to do that, then what?
I can address
And
that.
I'm
one.
just
If it's a
devil
drainage easement, it's our right to enter the easement to be able to work on it. We have in our fence permit that if there is a fence in an easement, we can remove it and not put it back up. But that would make your phones ring. So we typically put it back up as best we can. What we're seeing, every development right now that's coming in for the most part has a rear lot drainage easement to allow for the houses to drain to the back and then drain out. And what we're seeing are people putting fences up to their back property line in that easement, which also impedes the water from being able to move. So what they need to do is make sure, if we keep the fences from getting into the easement, they'll lose about 15 feet or 7.5 feet of their backyard. But that will allow the easement to be able to be maintained, and it will allow us to be able to get to it. And honestly, most of those easements are private, so it'll allow their HOA to get to them to maintain them and not us. But when there's a problem like this, we won't have to remove any fences.
Thank you.
Mr. Goldfish?
Thank you, Mayor. So this would not be going back retro. This would only be going forward. So to put up a fence, you have to get a permit.
Correct.
That permit's reviewed. Why would we allow a fence to go in a right of way anyway?
It just historically has. The application allows fences within drainage easements. There's no prohibitive areas. The only place in our ordinance that fences are specifically prohibited is landscape buffers. We have a section in our ordinance that specifically prohibits any structures whatsoever in a landscape buffer unless it's to satisfy buffer requirements, and a fence could be a part of that. But as far as drainage easements, we do not have anything that allows us to prohibit that currently.
So if
One of those dumb moments.
Yeah, so if I plant flowers in the easement, utility easement in front of my house and Santee Cooper or the city has to work there, are they gonna replant my flowers? No, they're not. I don't see why this is, I think, this needs to be a disclosure item. If you wanna put up a fence in an easement area, you do that with the understanding that, you know, you may have to remove it at your cost.
That's what we have now.
Right.
And it's becoming a problem for our staff that we have to remove it and replace it on all of them. Everyone has one in these new neighborhoods. Every homeowner has a fence in that easement.
So having it in our
So how can
ordinance
we
would-
tell them to remove it?
To remove it,
Yeah, why should?
we just can't permit them going forward if this amendment changes. That will help the HOAs out and help us out. There's two different types of easement. There's a public easement and a private easement. Public easements are areas, drainage easements that drain public right of ways, like the road and things like that. And those typically go straight into water bodies, a pond or something that we maintain. The private easements are smaller and they're the lot line drains. So that's when the water drains off of your lot into a drainage easement to get to another body of, probably a public one eventually. We can't tell, well, under our ordinance, we can't tell a private property owner that they can't put a fence in a private drainage easement because it's not our easement and we don't own their property. So the only thing it becomes a property rights issue unless we just say you can't put a fence in a drainage easement, period. And that would eliminate the problem. And I think that's what the ordinance is proposing today is we just,
All right,
we can't permit them.
That
anymore.
makes sense now. Thank you.
From the existing ones that we are taking out, putting them back in the easement.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because that's where they were permitted before. Now, they are legal non-conforming. So we should, going forward, assuming y'all don't mind your phone ringing, if an easement has to be maintained and a fence is taken down, it can't be put back up. That's the way the ordinance should, that's the way the ordinance will read, and that's the way we should proceed from here on. It is legal non-conforming once this amendment takes place, and once it's removed, it cannot be put back. That is what the non-conformity is remedied once it's removed for maintenance.
Is that material reusable? So the homeowner would have the expense of having it moved,
Right.
but how often might there be the expense of requiring more, for example, to fit another scheme? I mean, I don't know.
It would be, the cost should be lessened because they already have the material. The posts are going to need to be removed and re-cemented in, but I had one moved to my house. It wasn't that expensive, but there was an expense.
But the only thing that gives me a little heartache is we just said to that homeowner, let's just say they built in the last year. We said, your fence can go here. And then 6 months later, we're going to say, well, we've changed our minds. We shouldn't have let you do that. So if we have to come to your house, then you can't put it up again.
It does say in the permit that if your fence is in an easement, we will remove it, or it will be removed and will not be put back up. We're doing more than it's disclosed on every permit that it won't be
Right.
put back up.
It said we won't put it back up.
We won't put it back
But
up.
it doesn't say that.
Now they
you
won't
can't
be able to put it back up either.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the concern with every amendment we make to the ordinance. It was legal yesterday, but it won't be legal tomorrow. So there will be an expense going forward, but it will allow the drainage to function as it's supposed to and hopefully prevent some flooding.
I think on that one, Mr.
The other issue with that, I mean, if you've got somebody that had a fence up 30 years ago and it's non-conforming now as far as the material, it's not black chain link, it's standard galvanized chain link. What do you do at that point? You make them just put black across the back? I mean, that.
So if they have an existing chain link fence, the same principle would apply. If there's an amendment made to prohibit chain link fencing, they wouldn't be able to put it back. It'd have to be another approved material.
I mean, because at that point, you could have somebody who's potentially having to replace their entire fence, not just part of the easement.
And that part of it would only be applicable to the central business district. So that would be basically downtown.
I'm just thinking there's some plain chain link fence areas downtown that have been there for a while.
Oh,
Okay. Mr. White?
would you go back to the previous slide? The one on the bottom right. Now that fence has been there forever. What are we asking them to do, for example?
Nothing, it's legal. It's legal now, but if the amendment were to proceed, then it would become legal non-conforming.
And only if they closed or if there was a fire or one of those things, would they not be able to continue using it as is?
Correct.
Even if it was not, even if they close, it would still be okay. It would be if they have to replace it. They couldn't replace it with the same material. They would have to replace it or damaged. If a truck hit it, they would have to replace it with something another material.
What am I thinking of when I think that 6 months later, if it has?
That's the usage.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Gas station thing.
Yeah, then they have to bring the site into conformity that they can.
okay. Thank you. Mr. Goldfinch.
Mayor, I think Mr. Hyman raises a good point. I have a little heartburn, big brother saying I'm coming in to do this, and now you've got to replace the whole fence. That gives me a much, that's a bigger pill to swallow than saying,
I agree with you.
your own fence back if you put it in the right way.
That's tough to,
Now you just got a bunch of black Rust-Oleum around the garage and you will start painting.
I guess I have a question then for council. Is if we have a new development coming into downtown, which hopefully someday we do, and they want to put up chain link fencing, right now it's allowed by the ordinance. And I see heads shaking no that it shouldn't be. And I think we concur and the CAB concurs. Right now it's allowed. So what the amendment here today is trying to do is prevent new chain link fencing from going up. What that also does though is, you're right, if someone's chain link gets damaged, and these might be the only three that we have an example of.
Yeah, there's
This
not
might be
many
it
right
for
now.
chain link downtown. If that minivan in the top picture were to drive through the chain link and they needed to replace it, they would not be able to replace it with chain link if this ordinance goes through. There's not a lot of it. There's not a lot of footage of it. The expense of replacing it with a different material would be higher, but it would add that character to the downtown that is negated by the chain link that's there now.
much more like the fencing you showed us recently, where they're
On Main Street.
brick and columns between, sure.
And you're absolutely right, Adam. The difference is then that becomes an issue between the driver of that minivan and the property.
That's right.
To work out the cost difference. It's another thing when the city comes in and says, hey, I need to get here and I only need to take up a 6-foot section of fence. But now you're telling me I got to replace, 160-foot section of fence. That's, to me, I can't swallow that.
I think maybe we're confusing the two issues. These are not in a drainage easement. So we would never take these down. If we took these down, then we would be the ones replacing it. It's the one, there's 3 amendments proposed in this ordinance. I don't need to overstep it, Jessica, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
There's the one in the drainage easement, there's the CAB district, the CBD district having a chain link fence, and then the third one I can't remember right now, but we just talked about it. But they're all separate. So this one about the chain link has nothing to do with the drainage easement and the city's requiring it. The only way that these would ever have to have something done is if it gets damaged or needs to be replaced. Otherwise, it would be legal non-conforming until that happens.
Right. Yeah, that feels better.
And Jessica, I promise not to talk over you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there's 3 separate issues. One is the chain link in downtown in the central business district. The second is just revising some language to clarify for people who do apply for a permit, just removing some language. And then the third is regarding fences and drainage easements in residential subdivisions, in public drainage easements in residential subdivisions.
And why would it be restricted to residential? What if you had a similar situation on commercial property?
If there is public properties that do have a fence, we would obviously apply that same principle. It just doesn't come up as much in commercial, but the ordinance or the amendment would not specify
Good,
residential
good.
or commercial.
You're
It would
just
just
saying-
be public drainage
But your
easements,
vision
period.
for use of this, as things are now, pretty much is all residential.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion? I think we've got this one. What do y'all think? I think we're, okay, very good. Thank you so much, Ms. Hicks. Item 7 is a public hearing and first reading of an ordinance to rezone a total of approximately 88 acres of property located along Highway 501 and Midland Parkway, PIN 33800000001, from City of Conway Institutional to City of Conway Medium Density Residential, R2, consisting of almost 63 acres. high-density residential, R3, consisting of nearly 18 acres and about 6 acres to highway commercial, and PIN 33705020005, consisting of approximately 1 3/4 acres from City of Conway low-density residential, R1, to highway commercial. Ms. Hux.
All right. So the entire parcel altogether is about 88 acres. 63 acres of that is proposed to be medium density, 17.6 acres is high density, and 7.6 acres is highway commercial, and that's the portion that is fronting Highway 501. The comprehensive plan's future land use map shows the property zone conservation, preservation, and institutional. Planning Commission recommended approval of the proposed rezoning, given that the proposed use is consistent with the surroundings. However, given the flood zone that exists on a portion of the property, staff has concerns with the proposed density on portions of the property proposed for R2 and R3, and would like to see the applicant utilize a conservation subdivision design on this property. The applicant is also present, Mr. Powell, if you guys have any questions for him, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right. Well, first we'll open this up for a public hearing. I know that the clerk has received an email from one person who wanted to give input to the public hearing. Ms. Tessier, we'll hear from you first.
This is from Dave Schlosser.
And use your mic, please. And I forgot that because of the acoustics in this room, hearing in the back is really difficult. And I haven't been back home long enough to remember to tell everybody to please speak, especially loudly when their backs are to you. But I could tell by your faces that you're really straining to hear. So I'll correct it from this point forward. I'm sorry, I forgot.
To whom it may concern, I am the owner of property at 1301 Carson's Ferry Drive. I'm opposed to the rezoning of the tract of property along Midland Parkway. Medium and high density residential and highway commercial zoning is suboptimal for that area, in my opinion. The amount of parking needed for high density residential will require clearing much more land and impacting the watershed that feeds my neighborhood. The flood zone already touches our street, so adding another giant swath of asphalt for apartment complex parking will impact my house directly. This will have a negative environmental impact on the wildlife and increase the risk of property loss. I strongly urge you to leave it as institutional and low density residential. This will have a usage pattern, development pattern, and noise profile with much less impact to this neighborhood. The schools of this area are already red zoned. Adding hundreds of families will make that worse. It would be much more beneficial to put a school in that area to help alleviate crowding rather than more apartments to further overcrowd existing schools. Our neighborhood is a new construction development with purchasing decisions informed by the existing zoning. Changing these to less desirable conditions right after these houses have sold is unfair to the new purchasers. I purchased this house 6 months ago with an understanding of what sort of construction might abut my neighborhood. I do not want to see that changed now.
Thank you, Ms. Tessier. Is there anyone present who would like to offer any input relative to this this first reading of the ordinance to accept these properties with this zoning? I think that's what you spoke of, sir. Yes, if you will. I thought as much. Yes, sir. All right, Mr. Dannenberger. And we know that you have some specific questions that you're going to take up. Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment or ask questions? With there nobody being willing to come forward, I move that we close the public hearing at this time. Mr. White, probably seconded motion to close the public hearing. All in favor with a show of hands, please. Motion carries unanimously. And now, relative to first reading, what's the will of the council?
I have a question.
Yes, sir, please.
With the fact that there is some of this development in the flood zone area, he, us, whoever the developer is, should not be able to build in that because we are taking homes from people that have been flooded out already. and we don't want to, have to go back through that same thing again, I don't think. So I would like to entertain the idea that he, or the developer rather, not build in the flood zone area.
So we can't restrict building in the flood zone just across the board. We have regulations that say what that building will have to look like. It has to be 2 feet above the flood level. What staff's recommendation is on this property is to not rezone the residential tracts to the high density that's being requested, but rather keep it at or go to R1 rather than institutional, allow for residential, but encourage conservation subdivision on that, which would allow for the density, but preserve the flooding areas.
Conservation subdivision would be allowed in the R1 zoning as a by right use, along with the R2 district, or there's a few other zoning districts that would also allow a conservation subdivision. But staff does share those concerns with having that dense of a building or a zoning relative to the flood zones that exist.
Thank you so much. Mr. Goldfinch.
Mayor, could we hear from Mr. Powell?
Absolutely, please. If you'll come forward, please. And, I'd like to also say in our meetings that we still encourage people to wear masks. You won't see us wearing masks right now. Mr. White still wears his. And there's a little safety that comes from knowing that the people around you have been fully vaccinated for a few weeks. And I just thought that was worth saying aloud. But, take care of yourselves, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. And I was kind of expecting you to comment after public input. So I'm glad I got a chance. But let me cover several things and met with Mary Catherine and Jessica this morning to talk about this. And for starters, we're fine with we had proposed initially the single family section at the right of the site plan as R2, but under conservation subdivision, we can get those same lots with R1. So we're fine, changing our request from R2 to R1 in the single family section, which is the largest portion of the tract. You can see the kind of the bold black line that cuts through the middle of the open space there. That's the future flood zone that's on the proposed maps or the pending maps that are coming out that have a BFE established. And we feel like there are some ways that we can meet city requirements. For example, there is a requirement to provide cross access both into Carson's Ferry and what was it about? Rivertown. So Rivertown. And so we'd have to cross the canal, that kind of forms the flood zone through here. And you can see the blue portion in that drawing, that's the existing lake, but there's a canal that goes on to the north from there that kind of parallels that edge of Rivertown. And so, we have to cross that canal, bridge that canal, if you will, in order to provide that cross-access easement, as long as the city, wants to do that. You can see where that access comes in from both Rivertown and Carson's Ferry. So that interconnected, aspect that the city of Conway has been very good about insisting upon is something we want to be able to continue. In our sketch plan for this, in the single family section, we have more than the 30% open space requirement. So we feel like we can keep, most of the lots out of the flood zone. Of course, the ones that are going to touch the flood zone a little bit would have to be built up 2 or 3 feet above the base flood elevation. My house, the Hurricane Florence was 44 inches above the 100-year base flood. So I'm pretty sensitive to that. So even if you were 2 feet above the 100-year base flood, my house, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference. And that's my ground floor level. So we've had some rather extreme storm events, and I think it's proper for us to be more sensitive to that. We still, and also a meeting with staff where we have our multifamily shown in the middle of the site, some of that touches the fringe of both the current and the future flood zone. We would anticipate building that up. That's an existing, very attractive, lake, if you will, and we'd like to be able to have do it for our let's say owners there to have views across that lake. So on the one hand, it sort of makes sense to protect ourselves against floods, but it doesn't make sense if you're losing the value of the property in doing that. So we can build that up, and have it well above the 100-year base flood. Part of what we anticipate doing, and I think this is the key element of my presentation, is we anticipate taking most of the flood zone area and putting our stormwater ponds in there. Obviously, that's going to be the lower property. And in doing that, not only will we be able to provide additional stormwater management that far exceeds the local and state requirements, but it provides additional overbank storage that not only will tend to minimize flooding at this project, but flooding at other projects upstream and downstream, because we'll provide additional overbank storage. So the elements of the design are going to be kind of critical in this. I don't think anybody has a question about the commercial part, because it's kind of natural, but we can decrease our request to R2 in the multifamily and R1 in the single family, and then still meet our project objectives. And I think we can do that without any risk to flood zone by creating additional ponds and elevating the lots or the building pads for the multifamily.
What's your thinking about a conservation subdivision?
Well, it's kind of a new concept to me. And what I like about the conservation subdivision, we were talking about trees earlier, is that we'll take a big chunk of this and leave it in its natural state. Or we may put ponds in a portion of that. So the one gentleman was talking about the buffer. Of course, next to Rivertown, that's the area where we'd probably try to increase some of that open space, if you will. And so we can take and create that additional open space in order to satisfy the conservation subdivision requirements. I think that's a tool that the city can use to help preserve more trees. And so it allows us to increase density. And so it's really a tool that's already in the ordinance for the city already that I anticipate that we can use effectively here. When we did our site plan for this, the one that you saw, that site plan was with the conservation subdivision in mind. We still have to work through the kinks of that to see if we can minimize how much of the floodplain we have to impact.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions or comments? Yes, sir. Mr. Goldfinch.
Thank you, Mayor. Staff is good with commercial on 501, like it really already is anyway. And then going to an R1, and you think your client would be beginning with the idea of doing conservation subdivision to make a difference from R2 to R1.
Well, and staff's going to tell you this anyway, so I'm going to go and tell you that the R1 is underlying zoning. And so if you approve that today, that doesn't mean that whoever ends up buying this from Kingston Presbyterian Church is going to do the conservation subdivision. It's the smart thing for them to do because of the flood zone limitation. So I think if you approve that, the only option they're going to have realistically is to pursue the conservation subdivision in order to maximize the density. It allows smaller lots than R1. R1 is a 75-foot lot by 100. But if you go conservation subdivision, correct me if I get this wrong, you can go down to 60. So you're allowed to narrow your lots up, which is the reason we requested the R2 in the first place. And our lots, because I know you had the email about the lot size, but our lots are almost twice as big as the Carson's Ferry lots, and they're substantially bigger than the lots in Rivertown. So the lots we proposed here on this sketch plan, again, you're just approving the zoning and not this lot size. But if you approve the R1 and they did conservation subdivision, then those 60-foot lots would be basically the same size as you have in Carson's Ferry.
Thanks, sir. Yes.
Is this for Gary? Okay. I just want to make sure you understand what he's saying. Most of that is already zoned or revenue. That's correct. And so there's nothing that this group can do to stop the neighborhood from being developed on a project.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it, where the village should be at.
Keep a buffer of trees.
All right, so what we're talking about, so there would have to be, what he's talking about, the conservation piece of that is more patently condensed lots so that you've got a lot more trees, you've got a lot more.
So that makes it, I think there's something.
Excuse me. We're going to have to do this outside of. We've already closed the public hearing. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to stop you from getting information, but this is not the time to get into the level of detail that we're trying to do. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I don't think there are any other questions. I think we're ready for first reading. Is there a motion to approve first reading? I'm sorry.
But before you do that, I think Jessica wants to make sure that you understand exactly I think that just want to be sure.
Yeah, so what Mr. Powell is proposing is that on the portion, the 17.6 acres that he showed as R3, he would like to reduce that down to R2. And then the portion, the larger portion in the back, the single family, instead of R2, he'd like to do R1 there. So he's still proposing to do the multifamily on the R2 portion. The highway commercial portion, staff does not have any concerns with.
But you're still concerned, even though we're moving from R3 to R2, that the volume of.
Well, staff,
units.
Conservation subdivision is kind of like an overlay over the underlying zoning district. So if he gets R1, there may be more incentive available to do a conservation subdivision versus R2, because R2 by right, you only have a 50-foot lot width requirement, whereas in R1, it's a 75-foot lot width requirement. But again, the flood zone and the location of flood zone in relation to the proposed development is staff's biggest concern.
So I think I hear you saying that the developer and the engineer may be at a point where their decision isn't certain.
He has agreed to reduce it from R3 to R2 on the
Right, I understand that.
17.6 acres.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And from R2 to R1 on the
Yes.
other. I understand that. But are you, I don't understand. what
We
you're
feel a
saying.
lot better about that request,
Yes.
You feel a lot better about the request that he has.
the amended
Of course,
request.
The amendment, yeah.
yes. I assumed you did. So, right. Well, is there a reason why we can't wait for that is my question.
Well,
Or do we need to wait for that?
the,
I mean, I'd like to know what it is we're approving.
you've got a request for R2, R3, and HC. There is a notion that the council could approve that it would be HC, R2, R1,
Right.
or you could prove another thing, or you could deny it, or you could table it. There is no advantage to tabling it if the land use that he's asking is accurate. It's good. Having a site plan to approve is not what the purview of the council is. Is R1 the best thing given our concerns? Is R2 okay given our concerns as a concession? Is highway commercial the appropriate one for the one in the front?
So is what is before us now, the R2 to R1, the R3 to R2? Is that what our decision is?
It can be, if that is a motion that
So
comes from
that's-
council.
Okay, awesome. Well, I just made that motion. Yeah, I will move that we approve first reading with the assumption that what is being proposed to the city is a lesser or a more restrictive zoning from originally what was asked for as R3 be reduced to R2, and what was originally asked as R2 become R1, with possibility of preservation, preservation subdivision. Did I
And
say
the
it
highway
right?
commercial on the front.
And commercial's fine. Yes, I think so. I think so. Is there a second? Mr. Goldfinch, thank you so much. We have probably seconded motion to do what I just said. Is there any further discussion? There being none, I'll call the question. All in favor with a show of hands, please. And that motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. We are now apparently at Mr. Adam Emmerich's report. How do you do, Adam Emmerich?
Microphone's really close tonight. I'm going to get some of the housekeeping things out of the way first. A reminder that the ribbon cutting for Teal Alley is this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Our staff's been working very hard on that alley last week, trying to get it prepared for the big ribbon cutting. Family Day at the Billy Gardner Complex was on Saturday, and I'm guessing some of you may remark about this in council input, so I'll keep it very short. It was a great sight to see for us. It was a milestone day for the Recreation Department and a milestone day for the city. Hopefully it's a preview of all the additional things that are to come as we come out of COVID. This Saturday, we are holding the rescheduled Keep Conway Beautiful Cleanup Day at Riverfront Park. The signups are at Riverfront Park beginning at 8:30. As you remember, we were weathered out the last one, and then the weather didn't show up. So we've rescheduled for this Saturday. Staff is doing an emergency operations training tomorrow to prepare for this summer's hurricane season. And hopefully we do not jinx ourselves. And yeah, there you go. The annual meeting of MASC will be in Hilton Head this year. Barbara Tessier will be contacting each of you to see if you're planning on attending, and if so, how many people will be attending. The dates for your reminder to put in your calendar are July 21st through 25th. Also, as a reminder, the first reading of the budget will be at the next council meeting, second reading on June 7th. Now for the new stuff. Dominion Energy will begin working on and around Cultural Road for a gas line extension from Church Street toward Main Street. It is a transmission line that will help Dominion better service new communities in Conway and the surrounding areas. You are likely to see surveyors crews out there working shortly, but construction is not anticipated for probably another year. So 2022, you'll see construction, but a lot of that survey work will be done now. The Community Appearance Board approved the exterior modifications to the corner building that will house our building and planning department. Interior modifications have been going on for a few months. We've slowed down a little bit on that building because the weather's been good. We've been able to get some of the outdoor projects that we've been putting off for a long time underway. Hopefully we get those wrapped up and then we'll be able to work back on that building and you'll start seeing some of the exterior transformations taking place. We have been contacted by several sources requesting us to only mow the first 20 feet or so of street frontage on some of the FEMA lots. And where that makes sense, we actually agree. That will allow the native species to regrow and improve and increase the habitat for flora and fauna. It will also save us significant costs and time for our crews who mow those regularly. And unless there's objection to that plan from council, we'll start instituting that shortly. Now, there are some lots that we've purchased that just doesn't make sense on. So if we've purchased lots that are within an established neighborhood that have neighbors on either side, those will continue to be mowed. Hopefully neighbors will eventually lease those from us and take over that maintenance. But where we own large tracts of it that back up to swamp, only mowing the front 20 feet and allowing the rest to sort of go back to nature is better for nature and saves us a lot of time and expense from the city. I lost my place. I looked up for my notes and lost my place. If you have not been to Riverfront Park this spring, you're missing out. I've never seen it look as good as it looks right now. It's sort of a testament to our city staff. Not having floods in the last few months has also helped. But if you've been down there recently, you may have noticed a slew of new trees that have been planted along the riverbank side of the park. Those trees are serving multiple purposes. If you remember correctly, during Hurricane Florence, we lost about $200,000 worth of riprap that holds the dirt in place. And we've been continuously putting dirt out there, working on getting riprap back. And every time we put the dirt out, we have another flood and it washes the riprap away and washes the dirt away. Fortunately, we brought in consultants to try to walk us through the structures to build. And when they were telling us about how we could build seawalls and these other things, they mentioned to John Rogers that, look at this section over here that didn't erode. That's because your cypress trees have been holding it in place. So John, under John's leadership, we planted, I don't know how many trees? 160 new cypress trees on the bank, which will hold the dirt in place without us buying riprap and keep doing that.
How quickly do they grow?
Well, we put fairly mature ones in. So within about 5 years, you'll see a measurable difference. So we need 5 years of decent weather, but that'll be fine. And they're water-loving trees that will throw up their own knees that will act as that defense barrier that the riprap was before. And they look absolutely gorgeous from both the park and from the river. So it's really a win-win for us. The ugly rock is not the solution. And it's a kind of one of those design by nature things that's working out. And the last thing I have on my list is I know that the medians on 501 have been a concern of council in the non-city portion especially. They're also a problem for us. We have requested permission to spray them, to replant them, to mulch them, and we are waiting for SCDOT to give us a response on that. And as soon as we get clearance from SCDOT, that will be done. We want to plant them thickly enough that litter won't accumulate in them, and we need to put some more trees in there to act as a physical barrier to being run over by traffic, which happens every time we put a new tree out there. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Ms. Goldrich.
Do you know roughly about how many FEMA lots we have? And then roughly about how many FEMA lots?
We have 42, well, we bought 42 lots during this go round, and there were 20 from before. So roughly 62, somewhere between 62 and 65. I think we've leased 12 maybe. Now, if you consider there's a large chunk of those lots that are where Chestnut Bay will go when we get to that point. So those ones are not really adjacent to any other properties. We have a lot of properties along Freeman and Godfrey that we own. And now going back Sherwood, we have several properties on Allen that we own that are contiguous. And then almost all of Hawthorne is now FEMA lots, except for one house. So a lot of those are sort of in a natural area already that allowing them to go back to the natural state will just make more sense. All right,
I'm
thank
gonna
you.
take the risk of saying something. I hope this isn't any kind of harassment, but I'm innocent enough that I'm gonna say it in public. That's a really sharp looking coat.
I've decided this is the official sign of that winter is over.
Yes.
A Yankee from Pennsylvania brought out my seersucker jacket.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
Okay. Didn't mean to embarrass you. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. And now we will have input from our council, and we'll start with Mr. Shane Hubbard. All right, Mr. William Goldfinch. Mr. Larry White.
Well, I won't. I got a call today about car racing on Temple, Bayside, and Carroll Street in that general vicinity. And they wanted to do something about it. They wanted,
So bumps.
Bumps or whatever. I said, well, they have to do something else before they get to that point, if it happens.
They should call 911 if it happens again, first and foremost. Getting there in time to catch them will be the tricky part, but we can up patrols and I'll make sure that we get with the police and get that done.
Right, thank you, sir. Secondly, I was asking about a mural being put on the building on Racepan Street. Dr. Charles Wright, who is a former professor over at Coastal, he's a relative, not a relative. He's a resident of Conway also. He was born here. He's willing to do some work with that, as well as with the gentleman that was doing the murals for the city. That was one of his former students. And he said that if we provide the paint, he would be willing to get some of the work done.
Have him give me a call.
He's very talented. I've known him for many years. Wow. I didn't know he was here. I didn't know he was here.
Yeah, girl, I'm keeping up. And if there was concern, could we use some of the monies from the 378 corridor repairing stuff,
Well, just have him give me a call. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Thanks. That's mine.
Okay, you're welcome. Jason.
Justin.
Justin.
I've been called
Good,
Jason.
it's all right.
It's okay. When you have a brother Jason, you answer to his name.
I'm so sorry, Justin. You know I know your name. I have a habit of changing people's names. I'm
I
so
think
sorry.
it works, so it's okay. Now I'll touch on what Adam was saying earlier about Saturday. We had the joy of being out at the recreation center. I think actually said 900 plus kids were signed up to play some type of spring sport, baseball, softball, soccer. Mayor and I had the opportunity of throwing out the first pitch. We'll let Alex talk about his discretions of picking. I think he was afraid of his goalie. Yep. But great turnout. Facilities look absolutely incredible out there. They've done a wonderful job. So looking forward to continue to see that grow out there. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll just be brief too. Just kind of what Justin said as well. The family fun day out there was fantastic. It was a lot of fun, and I was very scared of the goalie. The goalie was my 6-year-old son, and he's intimidating. So, but it was a great turnout. I mean, there had to have been 2,500, 3,000 people out there. It was a lot of fun, and I think the kids all really enjoyed it with the bounce houses and everything like that. It was just say thank you to staff that made that happen. That was nice.
Yeah, that's the only thing I want to talk about as well. It was well planned, well executed. It was gorgeous. God gave us a beautiful day, and people came out ready to have some fun. These two guys kept talking about what it was like when they were the 6-year-olds and how much improved everything is. And I thought to myself, well, I hope so. Yeah, but we're doing really well. if we might, there are a couple of kids, a young girl named Reese, was it, who sang the
Reese Richardson,
anthem, if I could get her, if somebody could give me some contact information, please. And for, the young girl who caught that ball after, she is, let me tell you, she is so kind of talented. She actually caught my ball. I could have kissed her. And I think that's all, but today, kudos to the recreation department. It was fabulous. We will now go into executive session. Item A is to consider appointments to boards, commissions, and committees pursuant to South Carolina Code Section 3470A1, and to discuss negotiations incident to proposed contract negotiations for property on Highway 378 pursuant to South Carolina Code Section 3470A2, after which time we will reconvene, and if we are to take action on any of the items that we discussed in executive session, we will do so after the fact and adjourn after that time. We thank you for being here.
You need a motion to go into executive session.
Right, but are we gonna go?
We'll go downstairs,
We'll go downstairs.
and if there's any actions, we can come back up.
Right, if anybody wants to wait to see what we come back and do, you're welcome to do so. Mr. White, motion?
That we go into executive session.
Is there a second? Mr. Hyden?
I'll second Mr. White's motion.
We have a properly seconded motion to go into executive session at this time. All in favor with a show of hands, please. Motion carries unanimously. Fantastic.